Okay, so I want to start off with a little story. This is a true story. I met my current wife, my actually only ever wife, I should say that, in high school. Um, she was much better catch than I was, and I kind of dug my claws in there through college. But anyway, she had this one annoying habit, started senior year of high school, which was that she liked to pinch me. Now, she thought she was being playful and cute, and she would pinch me anytime I said some wise ass or sarcastic comment that she found mildly objectionable. And the thing about it is that when she pinched me, it really hurt. Like, I don't know if females realize exactly how much it hurts when they pinch with their long nails, but it hurts. So I'd say some wise ass comment, and she thought she would be playful and cute, and she'd pinch me, and I'd be like, ow, that hurts. And as time went on, she just kept pinching me. And as time went on, it got less and less cute from my perspective. And at some point, like months into the relationship, I was like, "Look, Andrea, I like you a lot, and I want to be with you, but you got to stop this pinching thing." But she thought I was kidding. She just kept on pinching, and this went on for like a year until I went to college, and I took my first economics course, and I learned about externalities. And I realized that this was essentially an example of an externality. She was doing this activity that had certain costs and benefits to her, and she was doing it way too much from my point of view, because she didn't really experience the pain that she was causing to me, right? It just wasn't part of her experience. And I'll never forget what my professor in Cornell said. He said, when there's an externality involved, one of the solutions to it is to make people internalize the externality. He used the example of someone who like mows their lawn at like 5 in the morning on weekends and wakes up all of their neighbors. That person doesn't really feel that pain that they're imposing onto other people, which is why they keep on mowing their lawn at 5 in the morning. But if you can make them feel that pain, that annoyance, they would factor that in and maybe they wouldn't mow their lawn as often at that early in the morning. So I said to myself, aha, I've got to make my wife internalize this externality. I've got to make her feel the pain that she's imposing onto others. So the next time she pinched me, and this is now in college, um, I really thought about exactly how much it hurt when she pinched me. And I went back to my dorm room and I calculated the best I could, like what I would have to do to have her experience an equal amount of pain. I was going to pinch her back. So I thought about it, she's got longer nails than I do, so I'm going to have to pinch a little bit harder than she does to replicate exactly the same amount of pain. My skin's a little bit thicker than hers, so I might have to lay off a little bit, but I wanted to try to replicate exactly what she was doing to me. So the next time she pinched me, I said some wise ass comment, and she did her cute, playful thing and pinched me, and it hurt. And then she turned around, and when she wasn't looking, I went up to the very back of her arm, the skin back here. I calculated that to be the best spot. And I pinched the hell out of her. I just really pinched her. And she whipped around. She goes, ow, what are you doing? That hurts. And I was like, damn right that hurts. That's been hurting for the last year. And I tell you, since that moment, she has never pinched me again. Now, I tell you that story because this screencast is about dealing with externalities. And that idea, that exact story, is at the heart of how we might be able to deal with negative externalities. In fact, all kinds of externalities. All right, so let's get started. I fear that this might be the longest screencast of the unit, and I apologize for that, but there's a lot going on in this one. And the ones that are coming, I think, are going to be significantly shorter. So here we go. First, we're going to talk about governmental solutions to externalities, and then we're going to look at some non-governmental solutions to externalities. For negative externalities, there's essentially two governmental solutions. One would be direct controls. So let's talk about cigarettes again. A direct control would just be a law or a regulation the government might pass. They might, for example, just outlaw cigarettes. That would definitely stop, or stop to a large degree, the negative externality of secondhand smoking. Another possible solution is taxation, and we're going to talk about that more in depth in a second. When positive externalities are involved, again, the government has two possible solutions. It can provide the good or service itself. So for example, if we're talking about anti-lock brakes, and if not enough anti-lock brakes are being produced by the private market, the government might just give people anti-lock brakes. Or what the government could do would be to subsidize people, which essentially means pay them to buy anti-lock brakes. So we're going to explore those two specifically, taxation and subsidies, a little bit more in depth now. All right, let's start with taxing negative externalities. You'll remember the problem from last time. The private costs of production don't reflect all of the costs involved. There's a difference between private costs and societal costs when negative externalities are involved. The solution is very much like the solution I came up with in terms of pinching my wife. Make those producers feel or internalize those extra costs. Now, we can't pinch producers, but what we can do to producers is something that may be equally painful to them, which is tax them. So going back to that cigarette example, if smoking a pack of cigarettes imposes $1's worth of health costs onto other people, if that's what the negative externality is, well, that's the pain that's being imposed onto other people. That's kind of like my wife pinching. So what I did was pinch my wife back. What the government can do is tax the producer in exactly that amount, whatever the amount of pain is. If you're causing $1's worth of costs onto others, then tax the producer $1 for each pack of cigarettes. If you do that, the producer will now internalize that cost, feel the pain that they're imposing onto others. So for the producer's perspective, what used to be their marginal cost, that red line, is now going to be the blue line. They're going to experience the cost of production, the red line, plus that $1's worth of tax. And now the producer is going to quote unquote see that blue cost curve, the societal cost curve, as being their cost curve. It's going to be equal to the costs that they actually incur. Once they internalize those costs and factor those costs in, we're going to get to allocative efficiency. That overallocation is going to get corrected because now the producer has internalized those costs. All right, I think that's pretty neat, and you can apply that to your daily life in various ways, like I did with my wife. All right, now let's talk about subsidizing positive externalities. You'll remember what the problem was, that the private benefits of consumption, the red demand curve, didn't reflect all of the benefits involved. Take that anti-lock brake system example. The problem again is that we were underallocated, not enough anti-lock brakes. Benefits were being thrown off onto other people. Well, one way of solving this problem is to get consumers to feel those benefits that they're imposing onto other people or that they're giving to other people. And one way to make consumers feel that benefit is to subsidize them. So you'll remember with the anti-lock brake example, I said that for every unit of anti-lock brakes, $10 worth of benefit went to other people. That was the amount of the positive externality. Well, if that's the case, what we might be able to do, or what we might do, is subsidize consumers $10 for every unit of anti-lock brakes they buy. If we do that, the consumer will internalize the benefits, internalize that positive externality. From the consumer's perspective, what used to be their marginal benefit, the red line, will now be the blue line. The benefits of getting anti-lock brakes, the red line, plus that $10 subsidy that the government's providing. And now that the consumer sees the societal marginal benefit curve as their marginal benefits, we're going to get to what is truly allocatively efficient in terms of anti-lock brakes. That underallocation is going to get corrected. We'll have the right amount of anti-lock brakes from the point of view of society. Again, I think this is pretty cool. One other solution when there's a positive externality might be to subsidize producers instead of consumers, and we're going to wind up with the same result. If we give producers of anti-lock brakes $10 for every unit of anti-lock brakes they produce, we're essentially lowering their costs by $10 per unit. As those costs get lowered, you see what happens to the supply. It shifts to the right. That's more supply. Again, we're going to get that underallocation corrected. And so we can do that either through subsidizing consumers or we can do that through subsidizing producers. Either way, we get to the societally optimal outcome. All right, so those are a couple of governmental solutions to externalities. I'm going to finish up with non-governmental solutions. One non-governmental solution are lawsuits, or just allowing for lawsuits. If you're hurting me in some way and you're not internalizing that cost, one of the ways I can get you to internalize that cost is by suing you, right? If you cause me $20 worth of damage and I can bring you to court and sue you for $20, you're eventually going to feel that pain. So court systems and lawsuits are one way we can get people to feel the costs, or maybe not so much the benefits, but the costs that they impose onto others. A second solution is called the Coase Theorem, which I'm going to go a little bit more into depth with in one of the assignments, but for now I just want you to know what it is. What the Coase Theorem says is that the parties involved in an externality will negotiate their way to the allocatively efficient outcome all on their own, that we don't need the government, that the people getting hurt and the people hurting will work things out for themselves, as long as a few things are true. First, property ownership needs to be clearly defined. Secondly, the number of people involved needs to be relatively small. And third, bargaining or negotiating costs have to be relatively low. And if that's the case, what the Coase Theorem says is that the parties themselves will reach the allocatively efficient solution without the government getting involved at all. Now again, I'm not going to get that far into this one because I want to bring you through an example in an assignment, but know what the Coase Theorem is. So for example, if there is a resort in the middle of a forest, and let's say the resort owner and the forest owner are different people. And let's say that forest owner is cutting down his or her forest to sell the timber. Well, that's an externality problem, because if the forest owner is cutting down the forest to sell the timber, not as many people are going to want to go to the resort, and that's going to hurt the resort owner. What the Coase Theorem says is that this resort owner and the forest owner are going to get together and negotiate their way to the allocatively efficient solution. And again, I'm going to leave it to that assignment that comes after the screencast to show you exactly how this works. All right, so we've talked about lawsuits and the Coase Theorem. Another non-governmental solution I want to talk about is what's called the market-based approach. And typically this is applied to things like pollution or other negative externalities. These are usually the economists' preferred approaches. And they try to address a problem called the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons says that there's no incentive to protect things that nobody owns. This is why we have so much air pollution. Nobody owns the air, so we all feel pretty comfortable polluting into it since it's not really affecting us personally. Or think about a student desk at school. There's a reason why you wouldn't be willing to just reach underneath the desk at school and feel around, whereas you would be willing to do that at your desk at home. Nobody really owns the desk at school, so everyone kind of treats it like crap, and that's why there's so much gum underneath it. That's the tragedy of the commons. When no one owns something, or when everyone owns something, we tend to abuse that thing. And we tend to do that specifically with our environment. Alright, so a market-based approach seeks to address this problem to deal with usually negative externalities. And this I think is particularly neat because it's a way to deal with things like pollution that don't involve the government or don't involve the government as heavily that will lead us to allocatively efficient solutions. Alright, so I'm going to take you through what the market-based approach to negative externalities. Now, take something like air pollution. I want you to imagine that we set up a market for the right to pollute, which sounds kind of weird, but we're going to sell coupons to pollute. And each coupon or permit would give a producer the right to emit a certain amount of pollution, let's say a ton of pollution. Now, the way this kind of system would work is that the government would hire scientists to go out and figure out exactly how much pollution we could throw out into the air that would be acceptable, that wouldn't hurt our environment too much. So let's say that scientists do that and they determine that 500 tons of pollution is the limit to what we can do without really hurting our environment. That's going to be the supply of these pollution permits. And notice that it's perfectly inelastic. In other words, we're going to set that supply at 500 units, and we're not going to sell any units more than that. We're going to allow 500 units worth of pollution, and that's it. Doesn't matter what the price is, $100 per permit, $200 per permit, 500 units of 500 coupons are available. Now the demand to pollute is going to look something like this. If the cost of pollution is high, if the cost of these permits are high, when the price is high, the quantity is relatively low. Firms aren't going to want to buy these permits. They're going to choose not to pollute. When the costs of these permits are low, the quantity demanded is high. If it's cheap to pollute, they'll buy a lot of these permits. And you can see how much pollution will happen if these permits were free, or if we just allowed people to pollute as much as they wanted to. Go to a price of 0. This graph shows that when the price is 0, firms would pollute 750 tons of pollution. Alright, well, like any supply and demand curve, where supply and demand meets, that's going to determine equilibrium. So equilibrium in this market would be a quantity of 500 permits, and each permit would cost $100. So if you wanted to pollute, you would have to go to the government and buy one of these permits for $100. And since the government is only selling 500 of these permits, we're limiting the amount of pollution to the amount that the environment can handle. Now here's what's neat about this system. Over time, we can expect the demand to pollute to increase as populations increase, as industrialization happens around the world. The demand for pollution, or the demand to pollute, might increase, but because we have a perfectly elastic supply curve, the quantity of pollution can never increase. In fact, when the demand to pollute increases, the quantity doesn't change, but the price does. As people want to pollute more, the cost of polluting keeps increasing. So with this new demand curve, maybe the demand to pollute in the year 2023, we're still only going to have 500 units of pollution, but the cost of polluting is going to go from $100 up to $200. So maybe you can see some of the advantages of this kind of system. First off, pollution never exceeds tolerable amounts. We never get beyond 500 units of air pollution. Secondly, it creates an incentive not to pollute. If polluting costs money, firms are going to have an incentive to try to cut back on their pollution. Third, the cost of pollution increases over time, so that incentive gets stronger and stronger as we go into the future. Third, cleaner companies are going to have a competitive advantage over dirty companies. Because if you can come up with a way of manufacturing that doesn't involve pollution, you're not going to have to buy these permits, and you're going to have an advantage over polluting type companies. Next, it raises money for the government. The government's selling these coupons, and the government could use that money to clean up past pollution. So this is actually a system where we can actually make the environment cleaner by cleaning up past pollution through money raised by the sale of these coupons. And then last, and this is maybe the point I like the most, if you're a conservation group like the Sierra Club or some environmental movement, and you think that 500 units of pollution is still too high, you can do something about it now. Because if you really think that, you can raise money and you can buy these permits and simply not give them to any producers, meaning that you can cut down pollution further if it's really worth it to you. So I love this kind of system. This kind of system actually used to be one that Republicans tended to favor. Now, not so much. Now it's more of a Democratic proposal, and we can talk about how that happened over time. But I think this is a great kind of system, and I'm hoping that we can do an activity in class to show you exactly why this kind of system is so beneficial. All right, finally in the screencast, we're going to talk about the optimal amount of externality reduction. However it is that we do it, governmentally, non-governmentally, through market-based solutions, how much pollution or other negative externalities should we actually get rid of? How much pollution do we need to take out of the environment? Now, counterintuitively, perhaps, the answer is not all of it. We need to consider the marginal benefits and marginal costs of getting rid of externalities. So we might talk about pollution reduction, or what pollution reduction would look like. Look at this graph. On the x-axis, we have the amount of pollution abatement, how much pollution to get rid of. Now, the marginal benefits of getting rid of pollution will decline over time. For the first units of pollution, excuse me, just busy dying here. For the first units of pollution, the marginal benefit of getting rid of them would be rather high. Imagine there's a toxic waste drum in the middle of the classroom. Getting rid of that is probably going to have a lot of benefit. But as you move to the right in the graph and we start getting rid of more and more pollution, the benefits go down. Imagine we've gotten rid of every atom of pollution in the entire world except for one last atom of pollution that's flying around somewhere in the air over the Pacific Ocean. The marginal benefit of getting rid of that last atom of pollution is probably zero, if not close to zero. Now, in terms of the marginal costs of getting rid of pollution, those are going to rise over time. The first units are easy to get rid of. They're the obvious ones, the toxic waste drum in the middle of the classroom. But again, imagine that we've gotten rid of every unit of pollution except for that last atom of air pollution hanging out over the Pacific Ocean. Think about what the marginal cost would be of finding, trapping, and eliminating that last atom of pollution. It would probably cost trillions of dollars to just find that last atom of pollution. So the right amount of pollution to get rid of isn't all of it. The right amount of pollution to get rid of is that unit where the marginal benefit of getting rid of it is equal to the marginal cost. Marginal benefits and marginal costs rearing their ugly head once again. All right, a lot going on in that screencast. And again, I suggest, I guess I suggest that if you think about it long enough, a lot of the stuff that I was talking about in terms of externalities and how to deal with them, you can use on an interpersonal basis and save yourself from getting pinched, metaphorically or literally.